We've been on a journey since the first of the year, preaching about Jesus in history and Christ of faith. And we continue on this today with the question, who is Christ to me? Now the scriptures of the New Testament, particularly the Synoptic Gospels, were written out of collections of stories. And this story about John the Baptist you will find in Matthew and Mark and Luke. You'll find it in different places in the narratives and used in slightly different ways because they had collections of stories that had been told and handed down orally. And these were probably not begun to be written until the late 50s or 60s and 70s and 80s. The Gospel of John does not contain this because it came at a later time and from a different set of stories. But here, this particular use of the story comes at a time when the Christians were in a lot of strain and stress. People were after them. Not only were the Romans concerned to keep peace and order, and so if people like the followers of Jesus stirred up things, they would want to quash it, but also the people of the religion of the day were very upset because they didn't like these new notions upsetting their people. And so they were catching it from both sides. Now, our scriptures were written not from the point of Jesus of history, but of Christ of faith. That is, looking back. And the people took these stories and they shaped the Gospels. And if you read carefully the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you'll see they're very different, and yet they have a lot of similar stories. In this one in Mark, probably the earliest of the Gospels written, because the Christians were in a lot of trouble. The story of John the Baptist is used to call out that Jesus was under the headlights of the Romans and that they had to watch their step. And so this story gets told about Herod, and it's an interesting story. It's a story about rulers. It's a story about the political life. There are some familiar themes in it for us today. Herod had taken the wife of Philip, his brother, which was allowed in that particular form in that culture. And he had sort of brandished this around, that he was a powerful ruler, could do what he pleased. And John the Baptist, baptizer, to be more correct in the phraseology of the language, had called his hand. And he had taken John the Baptizer off the street, put him in jail. But he was intrigued with John and obviously had conversations with him. And in some of the other stories, he had John prophesying for him, telling him about things. And he didn't want to harm him, even though John had called his hand on this marriage with Herodias. But Herodias was madder than, she could be, because her position had been questioned. And one way to solve that was to get rid of John. And so, obviously, she had pressed Herod to do that, and Herod had resisted. So the birthday party comes, And Herodias' daughter does a good job. She's one of the ones who can dance. And everybody applauds her, and Herod, trying to please his guest, offers to give her anything she wants, short of half of the kingdom. And she consults with Mama, and Mama says, the Baptist's head, the baptizer's head. And reluctantly, as the story goes, John is killed. Now, when you reflect back on that, the message gets kind of clear. That while you are working and doing your dead level best to be the messengers of Christ, don't expect things are going to work out in your favor. Look at John the Baptist, baptizer, and see what happened to him. He was one of the good guys. But the trickiness of people in power, there were those who didn't even want to touch John, and those who were enemies of John. And by no kind of political process, but by whim, behind the door, John gets killed. The church had a learning there. That to be those who follow Christ, who let Christ into their life, that is the role that you play in life. Other kinds of things are going to happen, but your focus is on bringing the love of Christ to the world. And that was an important message in that time. For here were people who were under siege. And it's an important message today. Who is Christ to me? How shall I respond to the vicissitudes of life? I realize in many ways the church in the United States became kind of a middle-class occupation. Sort of a club where people were nice to each other and did good things and did good works here, there, and yonder. And if anything bad happened or went wrong, then quite often we went back to another time to look at what was going wrong with the church, and even changed. As some have pointed out, we've tried to make heaven into a place where we could have this set of beliefs over here, and if we ascribe to these beliefs, then we would somehow, after we died, go to this place called heaven.